Welcome back to part 3 of our skateboard salvage project. So last time let me think, where did we leave off? Oh, I put the wheels to soak in a solution of water and vinegar to get those guys ready to be cleaned up. We had used our penetrant lubricant on all of the nuts and bolts on these gull wings. And we were giving those a good soak overnight. I pulled all the old bearings and set them aside just so you can see, how water is really the enemy of even sealed bearings. So one of the advantages of things like WD-40 is that it also acts as a water displacing, hence the WD, water displacing lubricant. So it'll help preserve, some of those metal parts and keep them from oxidizing. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about these trucks. While they were on the soak-in, I did some research. And so as I mentioned before, these are gull wing sidewinders. And they feature what's called a dual kingpin. So our kingpin is going through here and here. And that's in contrast to conventional trucks, which have a single kingpin. And the idea of this kind of stacking of these dual kingpins is that it allows you to turn a much tighter radius than would be achievable otherwise. So anyway, that ride style that these are designed for is typically referred to as carving or cruising. And what they're not good for is bombing hills, because all of that looseness in the trucks can translate into what are called high-speed wobbles when you're bombing a hill. And if you've never experienced that before, I can tell you one of the most important things you need to know about high-speed wobbles and what to do next is that however fast you're going on that skateboard, and usually when you're going down a hill, it's pretty fast, you cannot jump off a skateboard and start running at 15 miles an hour. And although it sounds cruel to say, if you've ever seen it happen, in many ways it's tragic yet comical at the same time. It looks like something right out of the cartoons, and I've experienced it myself. So anyway, high-speed wobbles are where your back trucks start to wiggle wildly, and literally can get bad enough that you can throw yourself off of it can throw you off your board. The cure under most circumstances is to lower your center of gravity and lean into it instead of leaning away from it. Anyway, so not for bombing hills, right? The hanger style is called a dual pivot. The type of bushing shape is a barrel and cone, and the geometry is what's referred to as double stacked conventional. I also found information on the specific bushings that will work with these, and also what won't work with these, which is, that's kind of a helpful thing to know. Anyway, last night I got the wheels cleaned up, and I just have to tell you that even though those wheels are really designed to be used with a longboard for carving, I just couldn't resist the instinct to drop them onto this little short board that I have. And this shorty is an aluminum deck that I designed and fabricated. It's 8 inches at its widest point. It's 24 inches overall. It has independent 8-inch trucks on it, which again, you typically wouldn't pair a short board with wide trucks like this, but I'm going to call this my clown car. Just for shits and giggles, I went ahead and cleaned up those wheels, put new bearings in, and put them up on these 8-inch trucks. And on a longboard deck, this would probably, be a nice, smooth ride that you could kind of just cruise and do some minor carving with, because with a single king bolt you don't have the same articulation as with the gull wings. But if you tried to put gull wings on a short board, that board would be so unstable and prone to do this that unless you were exceptionally skilled at riding, it'd be really hard to control. So I thought, all right, just for shits and giggles, let's try putting these 8-inch independent trucks with this 24-inch, 8-inch deck with these big, fatty, gummy 76 millimeter ADAs. And so I can't wait to take it out today and see how it feels. We used water and vinegar as a solvent cleaning solution to get those wheels all prettied up. And one of the things that really helped make that happen was using nylon abrasive pads. And it's important that you understand that nylon abrasive pads are not all created equal. They come in different degrees of coarseness or fineness, just like sandpaper does. And the color usually is an indicator of that level of abrasiveness. So we want something that's not super coarse and aggressive when we're dealing with delicate surfaces like the wheels. So I use this white, which is typically referred to as a zero abrasive, or a number 0, and or extra fine. And here's an example of the most common, which is the medium coarse green abrasive pad. These are the same things that you find on the back of your sponge that you use for doing your dishes. So these were super handy for cleaning up the wheels without worrying about compromising or peeling the graphic off of those, because I wanted to keep that. So you can see they cleaned up really nicely and didn't compromise the surface in any way. But when it came to the trucks, water and vinegar alone is not going to do it, so we had to use that penetrating fluid. And anytime you're working with something that has an oil base or a solvent base in it, like this, like WD-40 or silicone or other spray lubricants or penetrants, there's a high probability of those things being a skin irritant when you're exposed to it for prolonged periods. Plus, if you get that on your skin and then you're handling food or smoking or something else with that on your hands, you're introducing that chemistry into your body more readily. So best practices is that we wear a barrier glove on our hand whenever we're coming in contact with oil-based solvents like this. It's also very important to know that any rags or paper towels that you use with oils should be properly disposed of and not just thrown into the trash. With some oils, there's a risk of combustion or spontaneous ignition, but that's a story for another day. So anyway, you can see that these guys are still really crusty and crudded up. And although I do have a socket that comes with my this multi-wrench for skateboards, I don't want to take a chance of trashing it and fouling it all up. So I'm going to go, I looked at whether or not I could use a closed-end wrench on there. And again, it's too crusty for me to be able to get this on. So I'm going to go with using a socket and along with a ratchet to try and get that guy off of there. And to drive that socket on, I'm going to use a soft-based hammer. I can use soft-based hammers against the surface of this without worrying about damaging it. And although I advise against really hitting on sockets in general, I think for this, it's a practice that's within the reasonable limits of what this thing can handle. And this might be stating the obvious, but some of you might not think much about the fact that there are two different standards that you commonly find for measuring nuts and bolts here in the U.S. That's what's referred to as SAE, or which is the American standard, which is measured by fractions, right? And then, so almost anything manufactured in the U.S. is going to be hardware that has fractional correspondence. But when it comes to imports that come in from anywhere else in the world, it's most likely going to be a metric standard. And so millimeters are used instead of fractions. And so here I have a 14 millimeter socket. So I'm going to go ahead and seat that socket on there, gently working on there, and then take that soft base hammer and just tap it a couple times to get it to sit down flush with that guy. And then I'm going to take my ratchet, and to the right is for loosening, to the left is for tightening. So I've got that on the right side, or what it says is the offsetting. And then I can, because I've got my gloved hand, I don't have to worry about handling this gummy Joe. So I'm going to get in there and I'm going to see if I can get that to move. And I just want to tell you guys that it's so rare that everything goes as well as this is going. And it's something to be happy about. We can see that crust is busting off around there, but it did ride up off of that for just a second. And as we found with taking off the wheels, the last few turns of the wrench is usually the hardest. Mama. And if this started to really bind up to the point where I was having trouble getting it the rest of the way off, then I'd probably come back in and just shoot it again a little bit with that penetrant, or even back the nut back down, shoot it, and then ride up again. And that helps clear some of that debris, that rusty, crusty debris that's loading up in those threads. So we're almost there. There we go. That punk is off. Now we can come in and we can pull our cap on that bushing. I might want to go ahead and get my other glove on for this. So let's go ahead and see if we can move on to that second king bolt. And here you can see that I can't get in to reach up alongside of this guy. You can see that this is in the way, so I probably should proceed to taking the rest of this assembly off before I move on down the line. So I'll get back to you as soon as I get the rest of this assembly popped off of that surface. All right, let's get down to those bushings. So I'm using these pliers so I'm not really concerned about marring the surface of these because they're going to get replaced. So there's our bushing and its cap. Now we can take the top arm of that truck out. And now I'm getting closer to having good access to that, but I want to go ahead and take this guy off as well. My bottom bushing, and now we're getting closer to looking like we're where we need to be. Okay. So that guy, you can see, is just, it's so chowed up that it seems unlikely that's going to come off, but I'm going to pick at it a little bit and just see if I can't get a better look. Look at that, right? So now we got that to sit down on top. And, man, patience, persistence, and observation skills. Look at what's going on, figure it out. Don't just try to bully your way through that. See, that is just so crusted up. And now, again, I can use my soft base hammer to just tap that, and look at how all that crud just fell right out of the inside. And by using this plastic face hammer, I'm not marring the surface of my trucks. And look at that. It's just a thing of beauty. We got our last bushing to take off. Let's see if I can't get a little bite on it with these. Yes. Look at that. Damn. Man, these are going to be up and running in no time at all. I don't know that we will even need to replace this guy. We might be able to clean those up enough that they don't need to be replaced. And I like that idea. So there you have it. We're moving on. We're getting stuff done. And before long, we'll be mounting these bad boys up on another deck. All right, now that I got that second truck busted apart, it went just as well as the first. I'm gonna come back in with that nylon abrasive, and I'm gonna go ahead and use that nylon abrasive with the WD-40 to clean up the rest of this guy, to get off any scaling paint that was flaking off of there, to clean up these threads a little bit, and then I'll go out and see about getting the replacement parts for this, and we'll move on. I will double glove up when I do this, get a glove on my other hand, which I've needed to keep free for turning my camera on and off, but I'll go ahead and get that other glove on, get all this cleaned up, and we'll see where we're at. Okay, after scrubbing them up with a nylon pad and that WD-40 penetrant lubricant, I went back and used warm soapy water to finish washing them up, and dang, I mean, I'm just amazed at how well they cleaned up. You can see there was some paint loss on some of these surfaces, but other than that, they're exceptionally intact. All of the king bolts still look like their threads are in decent shape. I'll most likely come back in with a soft brass wire brush and finish cleaning up the threads on these king bolts, and then I'll dry the surface with a heat gun to drive off any moisture that's on the surface. If you don't have a heat gun, you can just, day like today, you just put it out on the sidewalk for 15 minutes, and that will burn off any water that's on the surface. And once that's dry, I'm going to give it a fine coat of paste wax, which will keep those parts from rusting. So I suppose the next move is to go off and see if I can source these replacement bushings so that we can put these guys back together and find a proper deck to put them on, and pair up some wheels. So onward ever, backwards never. Okay, so where we left off last was the trucks were all cleaned up and I needed to go out and get my parts. As I mentioned to you before, I always try and buy local wherever I can, whenever I can, and support local businesses, especially now more than ever. It's really important because a lot of businesses are out there struggling. So I shot over to Uprise before they closed. That's our local shop here in Chicago. And when I got there, I saw they had a sign on the door that said pickups only, order online. But when one of the guys that works there pokes it out the door, he asked me what was up, and I told him what I was looking for, and so he went inside, he took a look, and he put together a bag with all the things that I needed, and which was generous beyond my expectations. And once again, it just, personal relationships are so important. And so my commitment toward the business inspired him to sidestep the rules a little bit and take some time to put together the things that I needed for me. And so what did I get? I got replacement bushings. Remember, for the geometry of these particular trucks, we're going to need twice as many bushings as you would use on conventional trucks. I got 4 pivot cups. So the pivot cups are what these knuckles or protrusions are seated onto, so that you're able to have articulation. So I got 4 pivot cups, and went ahead and joined these old ones using that scribe to go in there and pick them out. And I picked up nuts for my axles, and I picked up mounting hardware for my deck. So I knew I was going to be working with a thickness of somewhere around 3/4 of an inch, and then I knew that I needed to get through a combined thickness of my riser and the base of the truck itself, which brought the math took me up to 1.5 inches, so that's what I got. And because all of this was still only like, something like $13, I had to throw in one of their maths to round it up to 20, so there would be no need to fuss around with making change. So I'm so happy that I've got everything I need to move forward. Let me talk a little bit about the material that I chose for making our deck. So I wanted to go with a solid wood deck, and so I picked this particular piece of material. It's a piece of kind of wood called chestnut, which is almost impossible to find these days because of a disease that pretty much wiped out chestnut in the continental United States. But this particular piece was reclaimed lumber that came out of a barn in Pennsylvania. And some years back, I was hired by someone to fabricate a structure that would go under these boards so that they could use them for shelves. And the person who hired me was so impressed with the loving care that I put into making that structure something that really showed off the beauty of these boards that they gave me one of these boards at the end of the project. So I think it's an absolutely perfect thing to use for this deck. It's got the width, it's got extra length, and it's a gorgeous color. And when this is finished out, that kind of honey yellow is really going to show off. It also has really beautiful grain. We've talked before about selecting boards, and so some of the thinking that's going to go on into how I use this board is that I'm most likely going to choose to use most of my width out of this part, where you can see there's a nice smooth continuous grain. But here you see that phenomena that I have referred to in our other woodworking projects called runout. And runout is something that you don't want in a board that you need to be super solid and sturdy, like for a longboard. So I'm probably going to take most of the board out of this section through here. Anyway, I'm really excited about this. I'm going to, when we get started on this next module, I'm going to show you how to do, how to make patterns and how to mirror that layout so that it's absolutely perfect. And then we'll go about cutting this out and shaping it a little bit. So I'm very excited about this.